Hi everyone, this is Sierra Burris, and I am currently going to be recording a speech for my Public Speaking Com 110 class. This is an informative speech, and if you can guess by the first slide, I will be telling you guys a little bit about the Black Death. I figured it's a little fitting given the fact that we are going through a pandemic right now. So, back in the Middle Ages, the life was very hard and very short. So the average age, according to a medical ethics post about 14th century ethics, the average life expectancy for men was about 28 years old, while for women it was 29 years old. And we're talking about the people who were working in the fields constantly, didn't have access to the best nutrition, so their main diet was mainly rye, bread, whatever they could grow or really butcher of the animals that they had. So like cows or chickens, or if they were lucky and they lived near a river or a body of fresh water or even the ocean, they could catch some fish. But life during this time was very hard and was often ruled by the church. So oftentimes life wasn't easy and there was a lot of stuff going on. Like you really didn't have freedom of speech. God appointed the king. It was very hard and difficult time. You had to listen to your rulers, otherwise you could face severe punishment. So during this time, it's also important to mention that the soul was actually more important than the body to the people of the Middle Ages, especially in Europe. So if you were to fall ill and you were thinking that you were going to die, you wouldn't call a doctor. Oh no, you wouldn't call a doctor. You would actually call the priest to perform your last rites, which consisted of prayer, anointing of oils, more prayer. You would even have to do another confession as you lay dying. They would make sure that you would have all of your business settled and in order, so that when you went to the next world, you would be, well, it really wasn't the next world, as they said that their soul went to purgatory, which is why they had to preserve the body. So even when they were preparing the body for funeral, they would just clean the body. They wouldn't do any dissections or anything of it. They wanted to make sure that when the final judgment came, they would be whole so that God would be able to recognize them. Funeral processions were also a big thing, so they would often pay a priest to pray by the coffin that their body is in once they had died. There would be more sprinkling of holy water. There would be prayer. There'd be singing. There would be even a feast afterwards. And then they would be laid to rest in a consecrated ground. And this information I'm just getting out of The Black Death, A Personal History. It's a really great read and really interesting if you want some insight onto what life was actually like back then. So, symptoms of the plague: lumps filled with pus. So these you could find in your armpits, in your groin, and they would blacken over time, and they would be extremely painful to the point where if someone were to touch them, you would scream and like hit them away, and it was very extremely painful. You would also obviously have a fever. You would also have convulsions, and in The Black Death, A Personal History by John Hatcher, he also references convulsions. which the characters in his book actually compared to the person who is ill being possessed by a demon. So, like, they believed in this stuff. They believed in demons. They believed in all that. The Middle Ages were magic, man. They believed in a lot of things that we all know aren't real. Why did they think the plague came? Why did it come to them? Why did this pestilence, this plague, come upon them? Well, many of them believed it was a punishment from God, that they had sinned and done wrong and they hadn't been repenting properly, so they believed that they were being punished by God. So this caused them to go on pilgrimages, which further spread the disease. It led them to concentrate together in groups to do processions of atonement, and they would beat themselves until they bled to try to atone for their sins. So, as you can guess, they weren't social distancing very well. They would still go and visit the people who were sick, and over time they learned you can't do that because everyone who visits the sick ends up falling ill, and then they get their entire family ill. They also believed that it was caused by witches. Obviously Satan. It's the time of Catholics, so Satan. Pagans, and the Jewish, because they were different than them, and they did not understand that a group of people cannot cause a disease like this, especially during this time. So, you'd usually call in the priest, right? They had medical knowledge and they were healers. However, there were also doctors during this time, and even the doctors didn't know what to do. They would come, and obviously their big bird masks that were filled with aromatic herbs that would help keep them protected from the plague. But they really did not know what to do with this, as none of the old masters of medicine, such as Galen and Hippocrates and all of the old masters, they had never encountered this disease. This was something that was new, and they think that it was spread from Asia through the Silk Road and then through all the trading routes that way. So doctors really didn't know what to do. They would try to treat you, but the things they would use to treat you were sketchy, to say the least. So treatments. They would have you get ground up unicorn horn, ground into a very fine powder, and drink it. This was thought to be very, very good for the plague. As we all know, unicorns are not real, but they believed that unicorns had to come out and be lured by a pure virgin in order for them to get the horn, and it was a whole ordeal. So they also believed that snakes could cure it. So what they would do is they would cut up a snake, they would chop off the head, chop it into little pieces, and then they would rub the snake's blood and everything all over the infected person's body, because they thought, in their mind, the snake was evil. So they thought if they rubbed the snake onto the affected areas and the infected person, that the snake would draw out the evil, because they believed evil attracted evil. So they also believed in the royal touch. So they believed that kings and queens could touch someone and they'd be magically healed. It was like a miracle, because they were appointed by God that they could heal you. So whenever they came out, they would kind of flock around the people and beg the king and queen and beg them to touch them in order to be healed. And they also ordered potions, fumigations, bloodletting, and pastes. Obviously, none of these really worked, and it was rather devastating. In the end, oftentimes the priests did not go out and perform last rites during this time. Too many people were dying, and oftentimes the priests were unable to leave the parish because of the sheer amount of people that were in the monastery. This is because monasteries at the time were considered to be like hospitals, and so many of the ill would be brought there for the priests to treat. Mass graves were made at this time on unconsecrated ground. I mentioned earlier how important consecrated ground was to Catholics, but most of these people were buried in unconsecrated ground just because of the sheer amount of death was overwhelming the community, and they were not able to bury the dead at a quick enough rate, so massive graves had to be made in order to dispose of the dead and keep the people around safe. So around 75 to 200 million people died, and that is a significant amount for the time that they were living. There was only maybe 500 million people in the world at this time. It was a significant amount of people who had died, and this is in Europe and Asia. So many people died. It was not a good time, and one of the mass graves that they found in Thornton Abbey, they found the corpses of 27 dead children, and the rest were a mixture of men and females. So many people died. The Black Death is not a fun time in history, and neither is really the Middle Ages. We go from a time where we had flushing toilets and running water. We were performing nose jobs, doing dentist surgery, giving people false teeth. Like, we go from a place of amazing achievement to, in a couple hundred years, losing all of that. And it's really sad. And perhaps if we had not lost all of that technology during the Dark Ages, it leaves you to wonder if the Black Death would have ended up as it had. However, in the end, many people died. Peasants and serfs were killed off, and the Black Death actually brought an end to feudalism in Europe. Overall, it was a bad thing, but some good things did come out of it. And the next slide, just my works cited. Lots and lots of works cited, as you can tell. It's a fun time researching this topic. Like I said, I really suggest The Black Death, A Personal History by John Hatcher. It's a great read, and if you want to learn more about diseases, I suggest taking the Black Death and Beyond, a medical history with Robert Brown at FLCC. It's a really interesting class, and it's great, and I hope you guys enjoyed my speech. Thank you.